Tricia, Eric? Okay, sounds good. So I'm just going to start with, I asked these guys to send in a bio and a headshot, and apparently that was not necessary. So I appreciate that, but I think what we'll do is instead of reading a bio, we'll just have you guys say a couple of words about yourself, and then we'll go on from there. So Adam, you want to start? This is Adam Riddell from HNTB. He used to be at UDOT as the IT director.
Yeah, like George said, Adam Riddell with HNTB, used to be UDOT's IT director. Before that, I was the data and analytics / GIS manager. So excited to have this conversation in front of all you guys.
I'm Eric Silwig, Director of Innovation at Sunt Construction. I've got about 17 years of construction experience. In that time, I've helped out with multiple rounds of everyday counts for focusing on 3D engineered models. Joined the Civil Information Modeling Consortia hosted by United States Army Corps of Engineers, and worked closely with some software vendors, but ultimately been responsible for deploying digital technologies into our workflows within Sunt Construction. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. My first IHEEP. Do I get a badge or something, or a ribbon? There it is. I'm going to save this. I'm Tricia Stefanski. Really glad to be here. Just looking out at this room, seeing so many friends that I appreciate. And if I haven't seen you or talked to you yet, please find me tonight in the hospitality room. I am our office manager of our asset management program office. I usually don't say this, but I was thinking today I would say, so I worked for a city, a county, I had my own business, and I've worked for a consultant before coming to MnDOT, so I have a wide variety of background. But at MnDOT, mostly focused on asset management.
Matt Blake with HDR. Those of you who are sharp and paying attention, it changed from what's in the program printed to today. So I'm about 60 hours into a new role here with HDR and looking forward to it. But I bring about 30 years in the construction industry as a contractor, and about 17 of that was building work and implementing work, and about 13, 14 years on the pre-con side and putting things together and procuring work. So spent the last 3.5 years at my previous employer in the BIM and digital delivery specific role. So very passionate about that and look forward to meeting more of you while we're here.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you. So today, Alexa Mitchell and I will be moderating this. And Eric had a great suggestion. I think what we're going to start out with is kind of give everyone, the panelists, a flavor of who's in the audience. So if you are in the audience and you're with DOT design or design related, raise your hands. Okay, if you're DOT and construction related, raise your hands. Okay, consultant design. Okay, consultant construction. Contractors. Yeah, this is more contractors we've ever had, so this is awesome. Yep, vendors. Awesome. Cover about everyone, you think? Any others that might? GIS. Drones. Federal highways. FAA. Did I miss anyone? All right. Well, let's get started. So kind of what the goals and objectives today are, we're just looking to sort of communicate the data needs. Specifically, we're getting into that part where contractors are becoming one of the more important parts of this because they're the ones that we get everything, and we're asking them for as-built, so we need to know how we're going to get data back and forth. That's part of the goal today, and then also to find out from the DOT side what we can use that we can actually consume, and then I think sort of from Adam's position, all of that data flow and the data science behind it. So with that, why don't we just get started? We good, Alexa? Okay, so let's start with Adam. Adam, what do you see as the most challenging issue for DOTs with regard to technology services when we talk about data exchange from DOTs and contractors?
Great question, George. So, yeah, speaking from experience that we've lived, I'd say just building something that contractors and DOTs can talk to. So, as the DOT, obviously you need to stand up a data repository, data exchange, whatever you want to call it. but it needs to be able to talk with all the vendors. Everyone needs to have their lens into the design data, you know, for design and then construction, and then ultimately operations and maintenance. And so that's, I think, probably the most important thing that a DOT needs to worry about, and it needs to be somewhere outside of your DOT state firewall that allows this collaboration. So, yeah.
Okay, Eric, Trish, Matt?
All right.
It's a hot mic.
We're just getting warmed up.
Yeah. All right. So I'll ask the next question then. So Matt, let's go to you now. So, what are the top 3 things that you would like state DOTs to work on to help you optimize the use of digital models for preparing bids specifically?
Well, I think there's a lot of good work being done by DOTs to produce documents. I think a couple things that resonate with me and things I've experienced are consistency in the quality, consistency in the quantity of information that's provided, and the ability to rely on that information provided. And you know, the consistency in quality and quantity, even within each DOT provides different amounts of information per DOT, and that I would expect that to some extent. Within each DOT, even districts are allowed, in many cases, to provide varying levels of quality or quantity of information for the contractors to rely on to prepare their bids. So it starts becoming, you know, you'd like to put as much time into preparing those bids and reduce the risk of the project, have more assurance on schedule time. But really, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is they've got 10 projects maybe they want to bid on in different districts or states, or you know, a zillion things going on, let alone running the projects that they have. And so at the end of the day, because everything does come in varying stages of quality and quantity and reliability, they don't put as much time on that at the end of the day to put a number on it and turn it into the bid box. And so what that means to the owners and most in this room is more dollars on the risk side of things and more uncertainty on schedule and just throwing something at it. And I hate to even say that, but really I think if some more focus was put on consistency and those things I mentioned, it really could help provide better, more assured bids in the bid box.
Yeah, so I'll turn it to you, Eric, but you and I have had conversations before about this topic and having the right building blocks. Can you expand upon what Matt was saying?
Yeah. I think one of the critical things of what I love seeing, and I might be a little bit biased, I'm heading up our task force with the Association of General Contractors to have discussions and dialogue with DOTs on what's important to us and how can we get that information in a way that helps drive business change, right? Because at the end of the day, like you're describing, we need consistency, we need predictability, and to really be able to take this data and do something useful with it, there has to be that discussion. And it's not just copying and saying, hey, well, you now have this piece in 3D, because a huge part of this is also the information associated with all of these models. And so to know how I can use that information, to know what information is going to be in there is absolutely critical. And so as we look at things like digital delivery, it's equally important that we not just go through the process of digital delivery, but that we also talk about what are the standards and what are the new benefits and what's acceptable for me to go in and use. And there's already been a lot of work and efforts gone on around this idea of authorized model uses, and those are so important. But most of the meetings that I sit in, folks haven't had that conversation yet. And I think that that's a big challenging point that really ties together a lot of the things that Matt just mentioned.
I was just going to say, so from a DOT perspective, I think what we've found out is, you know, we did an as-built spec 2011, right? Things have not changed at all. Things have changed a lot. And when I look at that spec, and I thought it was completely clear, Michael Kremen and I have worked on this spec. We read the spec. I think I dream about the spec, I'm pretty sure. But I thought it was really clear what it said, and it's not clear, and there's ambiguity, and then there's changes in people, workforce, technology. And so we continue to kind of look at that spec and say, how can we refine it and make it better so that it's clear for the contractor? And then when new people come in the field, can we do more targeted training, just-in-time training? What can we do from our DOT perspective? The thing is, we're all so busy, and there's so many projects. There's a lot going on. But we added like a kickoff meeting. Can we talk about as-built in a kickoff meeting? Can we do that right up front? Can we say, how can contractors and their surveyors work together? Because we need what changes have happened through the red lines, and then what are the updates from the surveyors. So anyway, I think that it's a constant evolution of change and getting feedback and understanding what's clear and what's not.
So real quick follow-up, and maybe we'll start with Trish.
Yeah.
With respect to how things are changing, like you talked about, it may not be clear, things have changed, technology. What about the difference between digital delivery and traditional delivery? Where do you see that coming into play?
Yeah, so I think at MnDOT, and I feel like, every state has the things that they've been doing well, they have gaps, and we're all seeing that, right? And we go, oh, Connecticut, how can I learn from New York? It's so great. Oklahoma's doing a BIM plan. Arizona, I've just heard all these great things already. But thinking about, we've been doing as-built collection for a long time at MnDOT, but we haven't got into the Legos, right? We're not doing a lot of Lego sets. That's what I call it, the models, the Legos. My kids love Legos. That is the future. That's where we're headed. We focus more on the asset data and what we're doing with that asset data and passing the asset data. But what we've done is said, hey, let's take these CMGC projects. So you guys have heard of Elk River. We have 11th Street in Moorhead. Let's take those projects. Let's take our design build, and let's work on how we can improve things there and then bring that into more of our traditional projects.
Yeah, I think for Eric and Matt, sort of the same question. I know it's not maybe from the DOT perspective, but for you guys, what do you see as your deliverable as an as-built? The difference between traditional and digital delivery?
Yeah, so the question was, what do we see as our as-built? And the first time I turned in digital as-builts, the client returned it back to me and said, you have to go redline the PDFs. Yeah. Right? And I was like, man, this is so great. We're getting survey data directly off of the equipment that we use to capture all of our as-builts. Like, what a great way to communicate with certainty that something's correct. Like, even just the transcription errors of looking at data and crossing stuff out on plans. And when they rejected it, I was like, oh my gosh, somebody's just looking to check the box, right? And it was really frustrating. And because of that, we've stepped back drastically on what our as-builts are. Because it was perceived that the client didn't see any value in creating good as-builts that actually help describe the infrastructure and the projects that we leave behind. And it's taking a while for us to realize that, okay, you have great DOTs that are now leveraging asset management information. And even within that, for us to understand as contractors who are historically good at and focused on the construction and the activity of building something new, to pull ourselves out of that mindset and then to say, how are people going to be using this?
Hello?
I don't know. Okay, we back. Perfect. But to pull ourselves out of that mindset and to say, I'm not just building something new, but I now need to stop and think about what is this data going to be useful for in 15, 20 years. And there's things even like fire hydrants, when somebody's like, great, I need to manage the asset of the fire hydrant. What do you want about that? Because I could turn in a 3D model that I used and created, let's say in Civil 3D, and turn that in. But if that isn't a perfect match to what you're looking for, or maybe you're only looking for a specific as-built point on one of the valves or something, I don't know those things. And I have a very difficult time looking through specs and standards to figure out exactly what's needed and how that differs from client to client. So from the as-built perspective, it's even more challenging, I think beyond the fact of you all giving us information, for us knowing how to anticipate what you might want to use it for, and knowing that the person who probably collected that might not be involved with that company or that firm anymore when you do go to use that data. So I think that there's just a lot of risk and unknowns there that are still maturing, and those will get better over time, but it's just hard to predict those things on both sides of the fence right now.
So real quickly, Alexa, I was going to say, I know, Adam, you're not involved with the bidding process traditionally, but what do you see from like a DOT standpoint or a data standpoint with this discussion of what needs to be in place so that a DOT can actually take data, maybe even files that they can't open up? Because I'm assuming, Eric, that what was delivered to the DOT, they just didn't either have the software or the expertise to, and so they said, give me a PDF. What do you see as a DOT needing for that data transfer and being able to consume it?
Yeah, I'd say that's a really good point. So just, whether it was designed in Autodesk or Bentley, you need to be able to integrate the data across all the, again, your lenses into the data. Whether, GIS is a really good kind of middle ground for bridging the gap between those two vendors. And so I would say they need some sort of an open format that's lossless, and by lossless I mean you're not losing attribute information when you bring it in. So that way you can have the interaction between the client and the designer and ultimately construction, and then bring it all the way back to the client with your as-built. So you definitely have to have the interoperability.
So we're going to bring it back to you, Trish, because it's just the perfect segue after that discussion. But you and I had many conversations on the difference between the way information, because someone earlier in the panel this morning talked about data and information. And there is a huge difference between how we organize information for project delivery and how we organize information for O&M. And so can you share with the audience some of those key considerations for standardizing data structure so that we can communicate with each other? Because my function is very different than your function, but at the end of the day, to be able to be interoperable, we have to be able to connect the dots. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I love that, connecting the dots. Go Minnesota ADCMS grant. Okay, that was my... Okay, this is a big one. So I want to first start out, I like this question, and I'm glad I'm on the panel, thank you, because I think the why and how are we using the data is so important. That is going to drive efficiency and innovation in this process. So in asset management, if you think about it, or operations and maintenance, we have regulations. We have MS4 regulations. We have state statute. We have I don't know, Minnesota seems to love asset management because we have a state statute that says we must inventory 5 different asset classes. So we have that. And then also if you look at resiliency, risk and resiliency, so huge. So we're doing a lot of work. We're doing a RIP plan, if you've heard of those, where basically we're saying, we know all the culvert data on our roadways. We know the elevation of the culverts. We can do flood analysis, but guess what? It ends at our right-of-way. We don't have that data from the locals. We don't have, we need the data to be able to look at risk, prioritize, do our 20-year MINSHIP plans, do our TAMP plans. So first and foremost, because I kind of, I come into a room kind of filled with construction people mostly, and they're like, how does this make my life easier? And sometimes it doesn't. But what it does is it makes things better for the agency, and we can make better decisions in life cycle planning, all these different pieces. So right away, we like to say, how are we using the data? And so that's a big piece of it, Alexa. Then getting back to sort of how do we do this? How do we connect the dots? I think what we've talked about before is GIS and CAD being these separate worlds. Those worlds are colliding. They really are. And that doesn't mean bad things. It doesn't mean we're going to go out of orbit or something, right? It means we just need to understand what is a pay item and how does that pay item interact with asset classes. So we've been doing that at MnDOT. We said, let's look at our 40,000, I don't know, Greg, how many pay items. Why do we have so many pay items? What happened? And let's say each individual pay item, what assets are they impacting? And let's link those. So we start to see when we do something with a pay item, it's going to impact an asset class. And then we're saying, now which asset class is it? And how can we talk, how can we make it easy when you're standing in the field to update asset data as well as take payments, and who's doing what, whose roles and responsibilities. So all of that kind of comes into play. But really speaking the same language, which I think we presented on at TRB, Alexa, just really saying GIS, CAD, different systems, let's get this language together, speak it. And we have a lot of data dictionaries. We know kind of what we need for asset management, and some of the data is more valuable than others. So it's kind of, we went through a painstaking effort to say we have 78 asset classes at MnDOT, 78 asset classes. What are we going to collect for each asset class? What are the most important values, the most important attributes, and what are we going to get out of that? Is it regulation? Is it consumers, like looking at the data? So I would say my advice would be, identify your asset classes, identify what those valuable attributes are and what they can, how they can make better decisions for you, and then start to look at where you can get that data within the life cycle. And then I like to say the circle of life. My kids like that too. So that was kind of long, but.
So let's bring it back to construction for a minute, since we talked about digital as-builts. But Eric, it seems as when we started the everyday count, so forever ago now, seems like, the focus was a lot on AMG, right? Automated machine guidance. Very practical application, but there's so much more. Tell us what else you could do with these models.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the story that you just told about finding what is the problem, what is the value associated with that piece of data, with that asset class, and then work your way back from there, right? If you look at construction as a whole, when we get to running equipment, everything should be perfect and ready to go, right? And automated machine guidance doesn't solve it if there's a problem related to the design, related to the execution, related to the constructability. And so if you look at what every other part of construction does, you can identify so many opportunities to better leverage data. I don't know how many times I've seen a set of plans come out and they've got a table with a whole bunch of values printed, let's say girder information, right? But like if there's a typo in there, it's practically impossible to see because it's just a list of numbers. But if somebody gave me a 3D surface of that and I can turn on a contour map, that issue pops out instantaneously. Because of the way I'm looking at the data, because of the way I'm making decisions. And that's just a really small example of something that we would normally do during pre-construction, is go in and QA, QC all the information on the plans. But by giving it to us in a different way, it allows us to analyze it easier and help us make better decisions. So instead of spending more time on, let's say, quantity takeoff, if the information is given to us digitally in a way that we can leverage it, and it's not just for information only, we then get to spend our time doing more effort around constructability reviews. We get to look at other options. We get to go out and better interact with our subcontractor community. Because it's not just us that's coming up with pricing and plans, but we also have to orchestrate a whole other team of people that come together for these projects to make them happen. And so by looking at things like, okay, what does this data mean to pre-construction? It can change the way that we sequence our MSE walls. We could take a look at how we're going to reuse our formwork for some of the retaining wall structures. There's practically endless opportunities for us to focus on construction value, but it all comes back to that original question of what's the useful piece of data here. And it's not just automated machine guidance, because an infinitely thin 3D surface can only communicate so much, right? Especially in the context of an overall project. And there's even things I think that are related to automated machine guidance, but aren't directly automated machine guidance. So one of the questions that we float around the AGC all the time is, how does this technology impact smaller contractors? And larger contractors like Sunt tend to have the budget and the capacity and the incentive to go out and figure out how to use new technologies and tools to solve problems. And whereas smaller contractors are usually taking the stance of, I'm literally living project to project and I don't have time to hire a person who understands CAD. Absolutely true, right? But there are opportunities where if 3D is done well, it changes a small, let's say a utility contractor's workflow from start to finish. Where when they receive a project, they receive a digital model of that project, and they should have software that allows them to go in and quantify and pull out the construction quantities that they need. And they should be able to use that for their pre-construction planning. And then they can go out, and when they go to execute the work, they've already got all the survey done because it's all being done off GPS. Hopefully there's a network nearby that they can tap into. And then the as-built information as well is a really big deal. Even just being able to as-built where we're trenching is critically important to making sure that you can find that utility when you want to and avoid it also when you want to avoid it. But there's just so many decisions that need to happen along the way that aren't automated machine guidance. But that one carrot that was easy early on from a digital perspective, right? Because it was just a lot of math computation on a machine. We now need to take time and really understand what it means for us on the non-execution side of the business. Yeah. There's a really good book called The Innovator's Dilemma. And in it, he talks about all of these major disruptions that come through different industries. And one of his big themes is that people need to understand the value and where their organizations are headed. And there's lots of times where it actually takes technologies 30 years to fully infiltrate a process or a particular industry. And so even if we'd stopped with technology today, there's still at least 30 years of innovations that construction companies can do today with the 3D models that you're making today. And so having those conversations and applying them to pre-construction, to survey, to operations, to business development, to post-construction activities are all critically important.
I love it. I love it. Before I hand it back to George, I do want to talk about audience, right? Because you talked about a very specific audience when you talked about the user who's going to be using that information, the purpose of the information. So I'm going to turn over to you, Matt. And you talked a lot about the people that are in the office from a contractor perspective, right? And looking at the computer, but we do have challenges in the field. And so Matt, what are some of the things that you see field staff struggle with today, and what is your wish list? You have a whole bunch of software vendors here. What is your wish list of the things that we need to prioritize to help the smaller contractors and the people in the field?
Thanks, Alexa, and all good points. Agree with them. In the field, some of it really boils down to something as simple as ease of use. And time and time again, this change management, we ask foremen and supers and folks in the field to carry iPads and take pictures and look at plans on an iPad. And if it's not simple to use and intuitive, the iPad's going in the garbage. And they're going to go print the stack of 1,000 sheets out and print what they need and look through it, which obviously we're trying to migrate away from. So I'd say ease of use, and along with ease of use is there's a ton of technologies, apps and software and tools that are available on the market. I would encourage tech developers to spend, and I know most of them do a good handful of time spending it with the end users, but just in my short time and in my previous role, I've seen a lot of instances where very simple pieces that construction people in the field need to have access to, it never even crossed the mind of developers. And these are major international developing companies. But something as simple as looking at photographs in a mobile app. And I ask my foreman in the field to take pictures and add them to this site, and let's all look at it, let's submit RFIs and do these things. Yet on the field app of this particular application, you can't see photographs. You can see it on the web interface, but you can't see it on the mobile app that I've just asked him to take pictures and look at. So something as simple as that was overlooked by the development team. It's in the works of being corrected now, but so I think, again, it sounds oversimplified, but from too often I hear it's got to be simple, and if it doesn't help the contracting community make another dollar or be more competitive, which we all want to make more money, but there's not room in budgets, bids, to put a big fluff number or, yeah, we can put some of this cash in there. Especially today's market, it's extremely tight. So it's being efficient and being intuitive enough that they can pick it up and use it without a whole host of training and complications needed to actually get the benefit from the service.
I think it's back to you.
Yeah, I'm actually going to follow up a little bit with that. Talked a little bit about the progression of designers, then to advertising, then to construction, and then the users in construction. But one of the things you said, Eric, struck with me, which is that if the data or the files came in an organized fashion, then you can go ahead and use it. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so SUNT works in several states, and every state has their own set of 2D standards right now, right? And as we move toward 3D, it's going to be their own set of 3D standards. On top of that, there's requirements around as-built. But what's really difficult right now is we can take a set of plans, and we'll go in and do our quantity takeoff in a software like Bluebeam, and our pipe estimator does all of his utility pipes the same way every single time, right? And regardless of what state it is, he knows how to go in and look through that design symbology and kind of what the normal lexicon for that state is. And 3D feels like it's an entirely different experience every time. And that makes it extremely challenging because you're going through that learning curve on every single kind of new client that you're working with. And on top of that, there's also sometimes months where he or she will not touch a 3D project because they're not all 3D yet. So every time we pick up a 3D project, it's going through with that entire team and redoing everything from scratch practically. And so kind of a similar structure of file types, of what data is in those things, what are the softwares we're using, all of those are changing every time. And I don't say that as a, hey, this is something that is a bad practice, but it's just something to be aware of. Because contractors, right now, our job is to go out and figure out how to provide value in that environment, and I'd like to make the bold assumption that we will figure out how to do that. But as we start to standardize on things and it becomes a more common activity, eventually I need to be able to have one estimator that goes out and all he or she does is the same kind of utility takeoffs all the time. And it shouldn't be a, okay, you know, you think about like the way we used to organize information, like the old school encyclopedias that used to live in everybody's closet, where you'd go and there was one way to find what you were looking for. And then the internet happened, and for a while there was like 50 different ways to find 50 different things. And it was really difficult to get to that same piece of data. And I would argue we're kind of going through some of those growing pains right now as several industries working together to solve these challenges. But it's something that is worthwhile to figure out at the same time. Does that answer your question, George?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
And I did want to clarify earlier, I mentioned a client that rejected my as-built submission when it was digital. It was not a DOT. I would never bring up bad stories with DOTs in this room. I saw how many of you are there earlier. So all of the bad stories assume that they're about other owners.
Thanks, Eric. So this next one's for Adam.
Same thing for contractors. I would never bring up something bad a contractor did.
And that was a house.
You were looking me in the eye when you said that. I appreciate it.
So this is for Adam. This is kind of following up a little bit with data and structure and standards. Adam and I have had numerous conversations about this kind of stuff. We started out with sort of CAD to GIS. We started talking about what a digital twin would look like, how we get that information, how element schemas are made, and things of that nature. With regard to that and with data distribution within DOTs or within organizations, what challenges do you see with DOTs and contractors that they'd be facing to exchange data outside of a file format? So kind of those discussions we had with CAD to GIS or getting that information, and then not only that, when the DOT gets it, how do they move it within their own organization?
That's the golden question right there, George. Figure it out. Just kidding. So, yeah, we've spent a lot of time on this when I was at UDOT, and we started with just one or two asset types. It was like guardrail and something else on just a couple projects.
Single post signs.
Yeah, signs. Guardrail and signs. That's where we started. And we said, okay, we're going to follow guardrail and signs for these projects all the way through the process. So design, construction, as-builts. We're then going to get the data, put in the GIS. We're going to hand it off to an asset management group, and then they're going to interact with it in their system and, you know, see how the whole process works. And that sounds simple now, but this was like what, 6-7 years ago when we were starting on this. But just those basic like starting like crawl, walk, run mentality, we learned a lot. And I would say, you know, starting from basics and getting that going instead of just trying to do everything at once, I would highly recommend that with anyone, you know, embarking on this endeavor of digital delivery. But I would also add that you need to, and I know like the staff and everything, it's hard for contractors, consultants, like the whole industry, and DOTs especially, it's really hard to maintain your staff. And so, you know, mid-project, you play musical chairs, and then you lose that. And so getting excitement internally as a DOT from all aspects, again, the circle of life that Trisha mentioned, you have to have everyone at the table so you can make sure that you're following the data all the way around that circle of life. And just, again, get that excitement, start from very basics, and then get going from there. And then I'll just keep saying this, interoperability with your data. Make sure that those at the table can look at the data through their preferred platform, whether it be Bentley, Autodesk, Esri for GIS, maybe it's a mobile application out on the grade. Everyone should be able to look at the data through their preferred, most comfortable state. And maybe it's even just a PDF that, you know, automatically updates from the database periodically. So those would be my recommendations to people.
So just so everyone knows, Ed and I have had this discussion about this day when you have DOTs or whoever the owners having a digital twin, and someone could come in and what they do is they use the software of their choice that's the easiest for them. So I always look at it as go back 20, 25 years, there was WordPerfect, Word, and Pages. And if you wanted to copy a format, you'd have to have that piece of paper in front of you and retype it. There's no chance. You might get some text in there, but today, you can pretty much convert any of those and get all the formatting. This would be a similar thing. If you're sitting down in 60% design, then you'd have the ability to look at that information with whatever software is the easiest for you to manipulate. Same thing at end of design, same thing in construction, same thing in asset management. And I think that it's like you said, you've got to start small. It's going to take a long time to get there, but moving that direction is good.
And another thought I'd add is just going from, you know, the concept of digital twin, that's still something that we're all trying to figure out what does digital twin actually mean? And if I asked every single one of you, I would get that many different answers, which is kind of exciting if you think about it. We're embarking on this as an industry and paving the way for what digital twin means. I was in Florida a couple weeks having the same conversation. What's a digital twin? How's that going to bring value to me? And, you know, George and I have had this conversation a couple weeks ago of, yeah, say you have your digital twin and now you have all these connected autonomous vehicles. And we've talked about that already this morning. They're piping in data into your asset management system. Sign was there yesterday, it's gone now. And that's where you start to have the value as a DOT for digital twins. But in order to have a good digital twin, you have to start all the way at design.
Eric, Trish, Matt?
I think just a couple things, bringing things that have been said and coming back. It's that end in mind mindset, and we've talked about kind of the steps along the way, but again, coming from a contracting perspective, if they're not really sure what the ask is at the end of the day or what the use case is going to be, you're going to get different, you know, the folks in the field may think they're doing their best efforts in collecting the data. They can hand it off to the DOT. Maybe it meets the needs, maybe it doesn't. So I think it's stepping back to that end in mind mindset, and I know we've all talked that to some extent, but truly it's the asset management and finding out what's the end goal and what are they going to use this stuff for. And then stepping back the next phase, maybe the contractors and the people building the work have certain needs and certain quantities they want to track, and payment and billing comes into play, and having certain details included in that. And then it's the vendors and subs that supply that contractor with the widgets and elements, and what do they need? And what do we need on bid day? Because what an estimating team needs from a model and 3D data and attribution is different than what a scheduler and planner is going to need to put it into a 4D schedule that we talk about and pulling it together. So every piece along that line has a different need, a different use case. And so I think just, it may sound too obvious maybe, but start with that end in mind and let's really focus on those elements. And I like what you're talking about with MnDOT and really those asset classes. And as a contractor, it doesn't really matter to me about an asset class, right? It's installing it, buying it, and the productivity to get there. But at the end of the day, if I can have that a piece of my work process and workflow, so at the end of the project, I click a button and spit out what Tricia needs, then fantastic. But today, the processes are so broken that we go along the way building the project, and it becomes this secondary effort by contractors and consultants alike, that now we have to drop back, collect all the data that we got from when we built the project, then transform it, then create some as-builts, then put it into a format that goes into the asset management. Why can't we bake that in from the beginning in the process? And I know we can. Kind of rhetorical question, I guess, but we need to spend more time doing that, I think, and addressing those pieces along the way.
I just wanted to add a couple things. You know, we haven't talked a lot about safety. So we also have had some small wins in sharing our data with other groups, like the safety group. saying, hey, these are asset classes, these are the locations. How can you use that to make better decisions in your safety planning? So even though we talk about the circle of life sort of being, you don't really think about safety in that circle, but it's there. You know, it's there in like the planning, scoping stages. But I think just doing some of those connections has been really helpful at MnDOT. So we've made that connection. We said, hey, safety, can we give you, I'll send you a file every week. You know, it doesn't have to be automagically moved. But so we're just like, let me give you this file, put it out there for your users, see if it works or not, then let's make that better and bigger. We've also taken our CHIMES data, which is our planning data, like our STIP chip data, and we have that now in our asset management system. So I am out doing signal maintenance, and I'm like, it's a big fix. I'm not gonna spend the money because I see a project is coming. So that our maintenance crews can make better decisions because they know that STIP chip data. So anyway, that interoperability can be easy. It can be one use case, one study that says, hey, this will be really helpful. And people aren't always ready for it. Like, that's the other thing. Like, whoa, 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 that's too much. Like, I'm not ready. It's all right. It's okay. Like, we're going to try it. It's not going to be perfect. And then we'll work through it, make it better, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. And I was sitting at a different conference a couple weeks ago, and I heard something that kind of resonated with me, which you kind of touched a little bit on, and is being able to move at two different speeds. The speeds of what can we do right now without losing that vision of what we should be heading towards. You know, we talk about interoperability, national standards. It's going to take a little bit of a time. But what can we do right now? And each of you has a different perspective, so I think this is a good one that, you know, each of you can talk a little bit about what are our roles and responsibilities in moving the needle right now and also long term.
So very quickly, and you guys already know this about me, asset management, we need to show how we're using the data. We need widgets, we need dashboards, we need APIs all over the place. But literally that has been my focus, is communication and then how we're using the data and trying to get that data out there. Even if the data, again, is not perfect. We might have errors, it might not be survey grade accuracy, but it can be used for some design. It can be used for sign design. It can be used to verify. Surveys can use it, verify it. Lots of use cases for the data. So that has been something that we've been trying to do. We have a warehouse, and we've been passing data internally through our warehouse. I wouldn't call it a common data environment. Where's Abhishek? But it's a good way. So even though we haven't done a lot in the cloud, we're saying, hey, we have this warehouse, we have this data, and we can pass data within our agency, and that's how we did that CHIMES connection too. So but again, communication, what is it that we're trying to do, and then showing that use of the data.
Again, contractor's perspective, I'd say, Eric, I know you've heard me say it, 90% of AGC's membership, represents most contractors, but 90% of their membership is less than 50 employees. And those companies with less than 50 employees really have a challenge and struggle investing in technology, investing in the software, or even a person, somebody, a fresh college grad who is savvy on the technology, investing in those resources so that they can digest the information that's out there. So some immediate things, I think, before we get to that long-term vision are, I talked about the consistency, but that helps, most of the work in our country is done by the small contractors, whether it's a, company I worked for and Sun, large contractors, and they do the big jobs, they do smaller jobs. So much of the work is bid build work, and it's done by those smaller, less than 50 employee companies. And until we can get them into the process and get them, moving in that direction and have confidence that they can take those steps and invest in the future and invest in technology, we're really going to struggle overall. It's going to become more of a feeling that you're jamming it down their throat, and they're just in time kind of reactionary on those pieces. So I think some things we should keep out keep in our mind today for immediate needs and things we can address are making sure we keep them in mind and making sure we're, again, being consistent in our delivery of information to them so they can make those investments and kind of get, I hate to say get with the program, but it's get up to speed in a manner that helps them be productive and kind of fit the model of everything moving forward.
I think it's a great way to phrase it. What can you do now? Well, right now, being tomorrow morning at 9:15, you can come to a breakout session that both Matt and I are at, where we get to talk about how contractors are using technology today on CMGC, CMAR, design build, P3 work. And we talk about what's going well and what's not going well, right? Because we've had the opportunity to connect with our designers, with our engineers, and say, this is actually what we're using in the data, and then that's what they focus on, like in the design build process. When we're refining the design, we've been able to look at what we're doing, and instead of a quantity takeoff on a large job for, let's say, PCCP, instead of it taking 240 hours, we can get that down to under 30 hours on a design build project so that we can get more iterations in, and the design team spends less time producing documentation and verifying their documentation. They spend it all in the modeling tools, solving engineering challenges. And I think you can duplicate a lot of that after this week just by reaching out to your contractors, reaching out to your AGC and saying, what data do you want from me? Because I've seen so many conversations where it starts off, hey, you have a 3D project that we're about to let next month. What do you guys think of that? And people are like, well, I would love to be able to get the CAD data without the for information only on it. Right? Like that is a huge step in the right direction. And even sharing a land XML or an Excel file with alignment data that's already entered is massive, because the first thing I have to do as a contractor is take a set of plans and redigitize all of that information. And if you can give me that digital start, that is a huge win for us to be able to start to head in the right direction. And I would even argue that's an incentive for us to build on top of that data, which is what 3D modeling is, right? It should be engineers producing everything that needs to be engineered, handing it to contractors in a 3D model, and then contractors get to go in and put in our means and methods and some of our selections as it relates to construction, where we add on to the information instead of recreating and starting from scratch. And so that's kind of the big picture out there of how do we hand off information without any loss, and that's accomplished through information models. And today, the first step can be both going to tomorrow's session at 9:15 in Canyons A, and also having a conversation with your local contractors about okay, if I could give you all of the curb call-out data, would you use that? Absolutely, every single one of your contractors would take that, whether they're large contractors or small contractors. And that's a really good place to start.
So I'll hit this from a slightly different perspective, more of a technology perspective, but I'd say take the processes, procedures, policies, everything you have, and pretend it's a glass bottle and just drop it, break it, and then really collaborate. And you can do this now, right? I mean, obviously you have to stay within your contract deliverables, but really just open your mind to what you should be doing. Again, that long-term perspective. And, you know, to Eric's story, you know, don't just get upset because you didn't redline correctly. Like, break the process and change it for what the future is going to be. What we're working on right now to build for 3D delivery, 3D digital delivery, because unless we're able to free ourselves from all the policies and everything we're doing now, it's going to take so long to get to where we all want to be today.
Thank you. I think we have about 9 minutes, so I don't know if you were going to open it up to...
No, we've got 39 minutes.
Oh, well, then we're ahead. All right.
So I think with that last thing, one of the things I wanted to follow up with is you brought up a really good point, standards. So, and maybe indirectly, but if we're going to get to that point, this is going to take a really long time. It's not just design construction standards. It's not just within the DOT standards. It's going to be that exchange between everyone, for lack of better use of words. I think, I'm probably not supposed to say where he's from, but Aaron Chamberlain's here. And they had brought up a term they call CALMs, and they're saying it's like a digital cathedral. You know, cathedrals took 200 years to build. And so maybe the first generation saw something built and it kept going until that last generation saw the finished thing. But each made a kind of contribution to it. I think it's true that it's going to be like that, where it's going to take DOTs to get that data in place, the architecture, the governance, and all that. And then there's going to have to be standards to be able to exchange. With what you said, how is that going to happen? How are we going to get to standards that exchange everything? It doesn't matter what it is, you have data you can exchange with whoever you want to.
And I think the BIM world has this a little bit more figured out than we do, where there's different levels of, a column or cathedral, level 100, or, the most simplest level is just a 2D representation. There's a building there, all the way through a cathedral with every little intricate piece of wire and stained glass is modeled in 3D space. Do you necessarily need that for your projects? No, you might not, you probably don't, but you should start back at square one and with your standards and your policies, and what does that look like? Just the bare bones, and then what does the next step look like? And just that iterative process. And hopefully, I'll say this, hopefully you do fail once in a while, because that means you're trying something new and really pushing the limits. If you're just staying in your comfort zone, then you're not pushing as hard and as fast as you could be.
So Adam, you have an IT background, and I often hear in the industry that national standards are difficult to do, but in IT we use standards all the time. So what can we learn from other industries on agreeing on the common things?
If you look at electric vehicles right now, just the charge port that you plug your car in, there's several different standards for a charging port. Just how you plug in your car. And, the market has kind of won, and it's looking like it's the NACS Tesla adapter. That's just how it happens. So just like beta, VHS, same thing. There's going to be competing standards, competing models, and ways of doing things, but ultimately, arguably, the best is going to win out.
I think for us, I go back to the data. Let's get the data full life cycle first. Let's do that first. Let's pass that data. Because that is something I think we can achieve. Get standards. I'll give you 35 data dictionaries if you want them tomorrow. And let's hone in on those data dictionaries. And let's see what attributes we want to collect. And then let's pass that data through the life cycle. Then let's build on that. Then let's bring in the Legos and the different, colors and stickers and all the things on the Legos that the data sits with. So that's what I would like to see, and I think we can do that first.
Yeah, let me follow up with Eric and Matt on that. So you're talking about data standards, data dictionaries. Probably all DOTs have something different with their data dictionaries. What about contractors? How do you guys see yourself interacting with maybe 50 DOTs and municipalities and others that have these maybe not wildly different standards, but different data dictionaries, different standards? What's it going to take to get to the point where you can submit something and it's submitted?
I mean, we'll probably just use artificial intelligence every time. It'll just rewrite it for that DOT. No, I think with
tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a difficult question because there's so much nuance in it. It's not even that there's a different standard from A to B, it's that there are totally different requirements from A to B. So one thing that's really important to one client might not be important to another, and I'm not going to tell them what should be important to them, right? That's not my role in that relationship. And I do think that as technology continues to mature, we have a lot of industry groups right now that are solving some very difficult challenges. NIBS is doing a whole bunch. We've got Industry Foundation class. We have some other really good efforts going on that are helping standardize parts of the language and also allowing spots for additional markup, where you could have attributes that are included with things that maybe describe what's really important to one client, but another client doesn't have to include. But at the same time that that's being done, we also need to realize that you might need to make some compromises, right, in the terms that you use. For example, and this is even predating digital plans, but I will never forget the first time. I'd been in our transportation group for maybe 5 or 6 years, and I was looking at the set of plans, and I saw LOL on the plans.
And I was like, that's a weird thing to put on plans. Like, what's so funny? And I kept on seeing it, and I was like, okay, I'm missing something here. So I had to go look it up, but it was layout line, right? But I'd worked in 3 or 4 states already, but those states didn't use LOL as a common term that they would put on their plan sets. And so when it comes to adopting a digital standard that spans all 50 plus DOTs, right, you now are in a spot where maybe this field isn't called LOL, maybe this field is just called layout line, or it's just called wall location, or something like that, right? But not getting caught up on those things and knowing that as long as you're communicating what the original idea and that value of that call out was, you can still be okay with it. But I think that as that progresses and continues forward, we will start to see more of those things where I can turn in the proper digital description of an asset that we put in place that does justice to client A's requirements just as much as client B's requirements. But again, in order to do that, I have to know what's important to each of those clients. And then I also need some time to filter that down through my business, right? Because if we have somebody who doesn't spend time in the office, who is always out in the field, and we change what the as-built requirements are, I've got to connect with that person, do some on-the-job training, and help them understand not just that they need to stick their GPS rod on the top of that fire hydrant, but what they specifically need to do and how that relates back to the use of that asset. Okay, this is actually really important. If there's a fire in the area, the valve direction is extremely important to how they plan their attack when they go to put out that fire. Right, so I need to be able to have time to explain those things, and I also need to understand those. So there's a lot that goes on in between those things. And the other thing that I would say is a huge, huge challenge right now, and probably one area that I have a lot of trepidation around, is this idea that we're turning over an as-built model. Because even on some of our discussions on the Civil Information Modeling Consortia through USACE was, what does an underground as-built model look like? And how do you communicate that? Because even if I use the excavator that has automated machine guidance to grab information, let's say every 50 feet on where that utility goes, there's still some assumptions about what that utility is doing in between those 50-foot increments. Well, what happens if I flew a drone over and I actually have every single point of where that utility was? Should that model look different? Should there be other data? How do I know where the connections are if there is an as-built utility that I potholed here and then, 200 feet away? How do you communicate that information? And so much of our world as civil engineers isn't visually observable. It makes it really difficult to communicate with accuracy and with context about what we're doing. And so a lot of that as-built aspect of this really needs to have some more definition around it, because I can give you an as-built model that has an updated corridor, but it's never going to actually match the way that the material came out of the back of our paving machine. Right? Because right now, all the major software programs think about corridors as a calculation from an alignment and then a perfectly perpendicular line extending from that. Well, that's not how the roadway actually settles, and so that's not going to be a perfect cross slope every time. So depending on what somebody wants to do with that, it may or may not be appropriate for it. So there's a lot of things that go in there that really need to be thought through and kind of chewed upon to really understand, okay, I'm giving you this information. It probably can be used for X, Y, and Z, but nothing other than that. Does that answer your question?
I think the standards piece of this, and we're moving towards that open standards and developing open standards. We're bringing in ISO standards from across the globe and slowly implementing and integrating as much as we can, I think, to a large extent. I think, how do 50 DOTs have the same standards? Well, they don't. But I think to some level, AASHTO and the bridges have done a similar thing where you can get certain elements, and I think all DOTs could agree when a bridge or a roadway or drainage elements are modeled, it's going to contain these elements. Now, what that element is further broken down to and what surfaces might be available for other quantity takeoffs or what that looks like, each DOT might need certain needs, requirements for that. And beyond that, each contractor bidding on that job for the DOT might even have further breakdown. So I think there is that overarching kind of simplistic standard. DOTs and municipalities take that to the next level, and then, as Eric, you touched on, contractors take that baseline information that's relied on, and we start whether it's modeling different pieces and wall construction and phasing and breaking it up as to how we see it being built so it matches our schedule, so it matches what we turn in on bid day, and it gives the DOT assurance that we can, and confidence that we can build it for what we said we could. All those pieces contribute to the model. And we touched on it throughout the panel here, but terminology, vernacular, nomenclature, all those things, the question was said earlier, we ask everyone in the room what digital twin is, and you're going to get different answers. Well, it's no different than if I ask you all what BIM is. And some think, BIM is a process, some BIM is a thing. So it doesn't matter what we're talking about, we're going to get different perceptions and views on this. And I think until we can collectively, as an industry, really get together and say, and define and say, can we all agree that this widget is named this, and your LOL, right? Let's agree to what these are called, so that when we have discussions, and I'm grateful that this group is helping push this and talking about it as a topic, but let's get together and really decide what we can agree to. Are we really dead set that this widget in my DOT has to be called this? We can probably figure out something that, having discussions across the board when we talk about BIM, or we talk about a digital twin, or we talk about certain elements of this topic, we can rest fairly assured that we're talking the same lingo, because you've probably already done it this week, and if not already, probably will happen. You'll have discussions, and you'll be 10 minutes into a discussion with someone, and you'll have in your mind that I'm talking about, I don't know, a digital twin, and you've got in your head what you think a digital twin is, and the whole time Alexa's got a different definition of digital twin in her head, and 10 minutes later we realize that we've been talking about two totally different things. Not very productive, right? So let's agree that moving forward we can get some similarities in there and standardize across the board at that level. It's not down to the nut and bolt, but I think just being cognizant of that disconnect will get us a long ways.
So, quick follow-up for Trish. So, with this conversation, we're talking about the model. So, the DOT starts with a model in Autodesk, Bentley, Carlson, something. Then the contractor takes those files and puts them back together. And now we have a different model. And also curious what your guys' concerns are of that model. But then we're then asking the contractors to give us back information. Do you get a concern that there's going to be some loss in translation along the way when you get to asset management?
Yeah, I think, so we're not ready for the model. Just going to say that. I don't know how many of you feel like you're ready to just store models, like a large model of all your roadways. Nobody? Yeah. So that's the first thing. We're not ready for the model. But then there's different versions of the model. So it becomes, what is the version? And the same thing with the data. There's the as-let data, as designed data, as constructed data, as built data. And I used to think, well, there has to be one source of data. It has to be one, we have to bring it together, we need to conflate it, we need to figure it out. Now I've decided, no, I think it's okay. I think it's all right to have 4 different sets of data. But like at the end of the day, I want what's out there. I want to know what is it that was built. That's what we need. Now for purposes of liability, for purposes of forensics, you might need to go back and look at those other models. So it's more like, here's the snapshot in time, not to make things complicated, right? But it is. So here's model number 1, model number 2, model number 3, which one do you pick? Yeah. So I think, but just kind of building on that. So we're not ready for the model. We don't really have a spot to put it. And if we do have a spot to put it, there's a lot of spots. And that's what I've heard. There's a lot of different places to store these models. And I don't know that we're going to come up with one spot either, because we're getting drone data. We're getting even snow and ice data from our snowplows. AVL data is coming through somewhere. We have all these different sources of data. And so how do we meld it together? And I'm counting on surveys. Like, they're going to help us. They're going to figure this out, right? But the other thing is, what happens when maintenance goes out and does work, and that model is impacted, and we haven't figured that out. And if we do figure that out, which we will, we're doing inspections, we're looking at how, I met a couple of great friends in the room on, the future of AI when it comes to doing inspections with imagery and drone data and how we can utilize that all in the model. But we still need it in 2D. You still need to give it back to us in 2 dimensions because we need to bring it into our enterprise asset management systems. We need to bring it into GIS. We need to bring it into our maintenance management systems. So there's this like evolution of change happening. And I think that it gets complicated and it's a lot, but I think we can figure it out. Like I said, different models. And then we got to get ready for that model. And so the 11th Street project, Peter's here, WSB, I said, you know what? Hold the model for us. Just hold that until we're ready. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to want it. And we've done that with LiDAR too. We're like, hold the LiDAR data for a couple years. We might do more extraction. Don't put it in glacial storage. Put it in cold storage. And then we say, hey, let's do a little bit more extraction for noise walls or for something else. So anyway, I think just baby steps there.
So one other thing we've been talked about with models and such, as contractors, do you have concerns about the engineer of record on the design side being involved with the as-built data?
Involved with it to what extent?
Whether it's coming back out and not redesigning, but updating the model, or to be involved with your submission of an as-built?
I mean, I don't know that I have a fear associated with that. I also don't know that it's the best solution. I think turning in a re-engineered model based on the as-built conditions might not yield much value further downstream. Because even if you build a brand new freeway and you have the world's best digital as-built model at every given point of that, when you go out and try to say add in a new interchange through that spot, you're still going to go out and re-as-built some of those spots. Like, you're still going to go out and re-as-built your specific connection points because infrastructure is just moving, right? It sits on a moving earth. And so even though there is other value that might be associated with that as-built model, the depth and the amount of effort that goes into it really needs to be looked at. So I don't necessarily have a problem with an engineer coming along and updating a model based on my as-built information. I would just want to make sure that it's not that that's a huge distraction to what we're trying to accomplish by building that asset in the first place, because I think you can get lost on that, anticipating future needs rather than looking at immediate and acute needs that are present right now. And there are some advantages to that, though, like the fact that we don't then have to go in and be using the same authoring tool that you all are using, right? Like, there are some things and advantages with different tools that solve contractor challenges really well or solve civil engineering tools really well. And being able to use your tool of choice allows you to focus on things that solve your own means and methods problems. And that's extremely important to being efficient. And by saying, hey, at the end of the day, I've still got to go in and open up tool X and redo everything based on my new as-built information gets really challenging. And most of the tools that are built today are built for solving civil engineering challenges, not built to document as-built challenges. And so it gets really difficult to do an alignment that isn't a perfect alignment. Right? Like, if you really wanted to find the actual alignment of that roadway, you'd have to laser scan it and then go in and extract that. But you would never get a nice, neat mathematical curve from that ever again. Right? It would be close, but not perfect. And what we want actually, I think, is the close and not the perfect. So there's probably some hesitation and some worry around that. But I think it's just because it's an easy distraction to get lost in that as opposed to adding value to the overall process.
No, I think just similar, and on top of that, there is efficiencies gained from having your EOR and the designer update the model. There is a lot of nuances, I think, as designs develop and the authoring happens. Author X does it a little different than author B, and trying to jump in after the fact and figure out what was done in that original file and update that sometimes can be problematic and complicated. So I think there is something to be said about taking the data and having the folks who authored the model are familiar with how it was set up to be maybe a little bit more efficient in some ways of updating that. We already have inspectors and CEI people out on site, and at the end of the day, maybe they're not the ones who authored the model to update the model, but they do have awareness and sign off that things were built correctly. So let's convey information through them and get things signed off. And I guess there's some tools out there that we have and personnel and resources that I think can help simplify this if we kind of look at it and be creative. I know it's a topic that always comes up, but I guess efficiencies in that authoring. There's a lot of things that go into a baseline design and authoring a model that maybe aren't inherently visible that I'd just be cautious of.
Yeah, I think what you both touched on is quite valid, right? Because when we design things, we design is a design intent. And when we talk about as-built, is never like perfect either, right? So that's why I think there's that conversation of the model of record that we all agreed upon, which is a different conversation than saying, this is perfect, this is the as-built. So model of record that we all agreed on, and everybody who contributed to the project, whether you were the designer of record, you were the CENI who accepted the work based on what you agreed on and paid for it, and then you agree that that's, there's no back and forth, right? There's no disagreement between what was accepted versus what you believe you built. So I think it is a greater conversation that comes back to having clear requirements on what is to be put back.
I was wondering, Alexa, after this is over, if I could just stay in this chair. It's really comfortable.
They are a little bit better than the audience chairs. I'm going to go off script here and ask a polling question. How many of you feel like you have a contact in the contractor community that's a subject matter expert at construction that you could have this kind of a conversation about digital modeling with? That's good. That's actually pretty good. Okay, I was expecting fewer hands. That's fantastic. If you didn't raise your hand and you're looking for somebody in your community, please feel free to follow up with me after the session. Part of the AGC is we've got a chapter in every state, and I can try and connect you with somebody local, because these kinds of conversations and dialogues need to be happening on a local level. As much as we talk about nationwide standards and things, we also need to be solving these at the local level, and that's extremely important. And speaking for the AGC, I saw Will Sharp in here earlier, but he and I did a presentation at a construction leadership conference last year with the AGC. And I had a map up of all the states from 2012 that were looking at 3D engineered models for construction to states now that had some sort of legislation in place or a pilot project in place around 3D models. And then I put up a graph of every state colored with currently using 3D models. And then I put up 2060, like when is this going to happen? When is every state in the United States going to be using digital delivery, 3D models as a given for these projects? And I was presenting to a whole bunch of construction leadership, right? And so I expected like 2060, and I expected them to argue with me, and every single one of them was like, no, you're wrong. And I was like, okay, yeah. And they were like, sooner than that. And I was like, okay, 2050? And they were like, sooner. And I was like, 2030? And they were like, yeah, their guess was probably in the 2030s. And that was pretty much consistent for every contractor represented in that room, which was surprising to me. But I think as contractors, we see that this is coming. We see that there are lots of implications and potential implications, but they don't know how to start that conversation. So I would encourage all of you to reach out to your contracting community and have these conversations, because they know it's coming, they can see the information on it, they can see the benefits, they just literally don't know where to start. And when I start to see that conversation happen, it instantly goes to, if you just gave me the alignments in a digital format, that would save me so much time. But then you continue to build on that. So I'm glad to see that we've got, just for those that didn't get a chance to look around the room, I'd say there were probably 40 or 50 people that are able to have those kinds of conversations with contractors in their area. And the rest of the folks didn't raise their hand, implying that they don't have a contact where we can talk about these things. But we should all be talking about these as a community together.
Thanks, Eric. And we talked about the AGC, but there are other construction groups. Matt, you are involved in ARTBA. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there too?
Sure. Co-chair of the Innovation and Technology Forum with ARTBA, and through that forum, it was developed a couple years ago, and in our first year, we felt it important as an organization, and ARTBA is a huge organization, as you know, and it's got consultants and DOTs and contractors and vendors alike. I mean, it's a smattering, really, of everyone. And that's part of why I enjoy it. I am so involved in it. But we felt like we had to define, in a way, what digital construction meant. And if we're going to go this path as an organization and get all these talking heads together, what do we even mean by that? And so we defined and came up, it's a short read, it's on the ARTBA website, I encourage you to go look at it, but it's for digital construction policy statement. And the purpose of that, again, was we passed it around to all of our different groups and divisions within ARTBA, got questions, we asked questions, we drafted and tweaked and eventually voted on it as a board of directors, and we passed it and adopted it so that we can go to our legislators and go to conversations, as I mentioned before, getting on the same page. That's one of the documents that we use as a association to start help making sure we're talking about the same thing. And then that was about 2 years ago, and then last year we followed up on that with I call it a white paper, I guess. It's a couple pages, but it's really building on that policy, that digital construction policy statement, taking it to the next level, and one piece in there is for construction, and one piece kind of touches on design and some different ways that we're going to use information. And it really tried to build on it. It's not answering all the questions, and it's not an end-all be-all, but we feel like taking steps like that as an industry and as an association will help us sharpen the pencil and the point and get to where we want to be and encourage the discussions. So we frequently have meetings. Our Western Central meeting this year in Irving is going to be with the Transnovation workshop on that, and that's a big portion of that discussion, is having digital delivery as a topic. How can we make that, advance it, and make sure people are all on the same page? Because ARTBA, of all associations, is really engaged at that policy level in Washington, D.C., and state chapters as well. But you know, having that ability to change and influence and get that same message out. So that's some work that we've been doing. We've worked I've worked with Eric on the Digital Means and Methods Task Force with AGC, and we're trying to do somewhat similar and come up with ways that AGC can look at things and as an association start moving them forward. And we don't have it all penciled out and figured out, but again, I appreciate the discussions, because nothing's going to happen if we don't talk about it and come together as groups. So all of you, when Eric asked about a contractor you can talk to this about, bring them next year, because I want to have the same conversation with more folks, a more broad, diverse audience, and Thomas would love that if they all show up in Iowa. But to have those discussions, because I think that's how we're going to get things moving forward, and again, start talking the same picture.
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. What we want to do is open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions for contractors, IT, O&M? Yeah.
Hello, Bill Pratt, Connecticut DOT, and I guess this question's for Eric and Matt. So if we were to deliver a 3D model today, what should we be doing? Should we talk to the contractors to see what they want, or should we give it to you in a common vendor solution? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So what would you deliver today? I think if you've done any projects in your state that are alternative project delivery method, if it's design build, if it's CMRS, CMGC, your contractors have probably worked with your design and engineering partners to develop some sort of standard as to how they were exchanging information, and that's probably an excellent place to start. some of the examples that Matt and I will talk through tomorrow morning at 9:15 in Canyons A in one of the best breakout sessions here. We're going to go through exactly how we've done that, right? We had a design build project in Arizona, and step one was before anybody started modeling and engineering or doing any problem solving, these are the specific points that we need on an ADOT curb for us to be able to go in and understand what we need to as contractors. I need this thing for survey, I need this piece for automated machine guidance, I need this area, so that way I know how much I have to fine grade. And so we would take their 2D plans and literally just call out things. And our design partner happened to be using Open Roads, and we on that project happened to be using Civil 3D, but they could go in and their levels were named in such a way that we could import that DGN file into Civil 3D and hit rebuild, and it would redo it all for us. And so by having that conversation up front and marking up a set of your 2D plans, that was wonderful, because it takes this really abstract concept of the model and breaks it down into, these are my uses, these are the things I'm going to do with them, and this is how I use it. And if you can get to that conversation, that's where the sweet spot is, where you get instant value on each side of the fence, and then making sure that you share it without that for information only restriction on it.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. What if it was design, bid, build? Short answer. Short answer.
Have the conversation with AGC or ARTBA, right? Do that outside of the contract, but talk to the contractors and run through that same process.
Yes, exactly. You got to ask and solicit the input. If we try to give the answer and provide them with a basket of information and think that's what they want, that's where we've been, that's where we're at today. And 9 times out of 10, that basket of information doesn't fit, right?
Got a question over here. Once again, Greg Ruby from Minnesota DOT. Hi, Tricia. The question I wanted to ask was, as we get farther along with our vendor partners and being able to put more data into the model at all the stages of its utilization, one of the questions I've had asked of me, for example, is, hey, we can put pricing information in. Would we hand that model out to our contractor partners because it looks like an engineer's estimate? And on the back end, at the Minnesota Transportation Conference this spring, there was a presentation from Gopher One Call for utilities, and they were saying one of their big issues was owners of utilities saying, hey, don't put all my data in that system, or I'm not sure I want to give it to you because somebody might see it and I don't want them to see our critical infrastructure, for lack of a better description. But as we get better at putting more data into the model, location and all the properties and characteristics of it, the data exchangeability of that model makes it a little bit harder to manage. What are your thoughts on that?
Greg, data governance, your 2 favorite words, right? I mean, I think it comes down to, and I'm going to let these guys answer too, but I just want to address that because I think it's really good, because sometimes so when we looked at our enterprise asset management database and we were building it, we said, so if anyone's heard of damage restitution, so if you hit a signal pole, if it's icy and you hit a signal pole and they put a little red tag on it, do not take the red tag away. It's yellow tag, sorry. Do not take the yellow tag away, because that's how we know it was you that hit it. So on that yellow tag, for example, for real, like, we know that our crew did the work, they fixed this signal pole, it costs thousands of dollars, and we know how to bill it back to insurance and what to do because of the crash report now, which is more automated. But within that crash report, there's private information. So we had these conversations essentially to say, when does that private information, should it come into our enterprise asset management database? Because if it does, it's going to change the way we share the data. So we kept that separate. We said, no, this is going to be a public data set. And then me as the steward, I was like, this is very clear now. I know I can share all the data. I know it's not in there. And I think something similar needs to happen, right? Like that. There needs to be safeguards in place to say, we cannot, because I want the cost data. I want to know how much it costs to put in that signal pole, because I want to know what is the dollar amount on the capital side, what do we spend in maintenance, how can we lower those life cycle costs. So I want to know, but when is the right time to hand me that data, and how do you do that, which is very tricky.
So I promised I would ask you a difficult question, and that was not me, so.
Greg owes me a glass of wine.
Yeah, but to that question, what you said is absolutely true. And so we'd like to hear from Adam with your IT background. But today we have rules for discoverable data, discoverable records. So it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. So from your IT background, you probably have dealt with what's discoverable and what's not discoverable.
Yeah, my hair is standing up a little bit with the PII and the asset management data. That'd be a nightmare. So I would highly discourage anyone doing that. Most of the states are working on legislation for, PII and protecting people's information, which is good. And we just have to kind of think about, like Trish mentioned, keep it out of your database. For the fiber example or the utility example, maybe you don't specify exactly what the asset is and who the owner is, but maybe, there's a duct here or a conduit here. It's this big. It's going to cost this much to move. So you could get creative in ways like that. PII, publicly identifiable information. So yeah, phone number, name, things that anyone in this room would want the rest of us in this room knowing.
All right, that brings us to the end of the panel discussion. Let's give these guys a big round of applause. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it. And bad news, Trish. You guys have to get out of the chair now. All right, next up, you probably have to come over to this side, James. Let's see here. That's Adams.
That's so funny. That's so nice.
This one is.
That's me.
Oh, okay. Not sure why I couldn't see it. There's Eric's. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it. James, come on up. So next we're going to have a series of updates from different national initiatives. And so first up we'll have James Gray from Federal Highways giving Federal Highways update. Thanks,
Awesome.
James.
Do you have a clicker to move the slides forward? I don't want to keep yelling slide. So I have to follow a panel. So I'm going to try to keep the energy and engagement very high level, keep everybody going. But, I'm also going to try to cram over a year's worth of federal highway engagement and BIM into about 20 minutes. So I think that's going to help me make sure that everybody stays engaged and excited about the topic. But before we do any of that, I'm going to bring everything to a screeching halt to figure out why we're not showing anything up on the screen. There we go. Let the attorneys be happy by letting everybody know we're not going to talk policy, guidance, or try to interpret any regulations, and we're not sponsoring any products. With that, the attorneys are satisfied, and we can get back into the exciting things people actually want to talk about. So we had a panel up here, and we've had a lot of discussions today about BIM, how we're going to advance it, the steps. It seems overwhelming, right? It's a lot of things to cover. It's all parts of an agency, organization. There's IT, there's funding, there's training. Good news, Federal Highway has a national strategic roadmap. And what it goes into is it breaks it down a little bit, right? It looks at the people and the skills, looks at the technology you'll need to know, policies. We don't want to think about policies, but you have to think about what are your policies, the data governance policies, right? You need to understand those things, how to roll that in, and then data standards, right? We talked about data standards. You heard about that. How do you solve all of those things? So kind of, again, breaking down this really big, complex thing that we want to get to, something a little bit more manageable. And we'll take and break it down even further to, okay, now let's start to talk about these little steps we can take, right? Because we're not going to do all of those things in one chunk. That's a little daunting. That gets a little bit hard to envision. All right, where do we start? Where would we finish? What do we iterate through to get to something that looks like BIM? So again, now we're breaking it down into these really implementable, actionable items, things you can walk through, you can implement into your own state-specific plan. And then kind of put together a framework of what that might look like, right? And then so you can look at where you're at, some of these things you might already have. You might already have privacy policies, great, you don't have to create a new privacy policy. You might have 3D modeling capabilities, great, you don't need to have training on 3D modeling. Now you need to look at those other areas. How do you integrate? How do you move holistically through this to get to that point where you have a fully BIM realized system of all of your different elements that need to fit together here? And we don't really have a super concrete time frame, but lets you think about time frames on this. It's always going to be a function of the resources, personnel, and funding that you can put towards accomplishing each one of these tasks to be considering how fast you'll be able to move through these tasks. So that was very quickly the National Strategic Roadmap. There will be websites at the end of this presentation, so when you want to read the full report and put together your own state-specific plan, you can go to the website and pull the National Strategic Plan and copy as much of it makes sense for you. We also went and we've looked abroad to see what the other countries are doing. If there's things that we can learn, things that we can borrow to help accelerate things nationally, we should do that. And this is just going to be a quick look at some of the states, or some of the countries we looked at, and sort of looked at their capabilities, their processes, where they were advanced, that we could again look at those better use cases. And again, it's over a year's worth of federal highway BIM stuff. There are things that hit the cutting room floor, and one of the things that hit the cutting room floor was BIM Week. Just out of curiosity, anybody went to BIM Week this year? All right, so good to see that there was a good bit of hands there. So we brought together the pooled funds, federal highway, international partners, JTCEES, and JSTAN all together in one room, and we talked BIM for a week straight. So if you ever want to get into data standards, we got into data standards. But it was also an opportunity for us to share in detail what we got from all of these countries. So again, one of the key takeaways here is that data interoperability. I think we kind of keep coming back to that, right? No one wants to get locked into a proprietary system. Earlier in my career, I'd say up until probably 5 years ago, maybe even less than that, there were still some systems I used that were still MS-DOS-based systems, but they were legacy systems that nobody really, I think, knew how to rebuild, and the cost to build something from scratch, so we just keep kind of patching that system together and let it run. And I think we don't want to find ourselves in that scenario anymore where we're locked into these legacy systems just because we don't know how to transition our data back out of it. So that's one of the key takeaways. And to try to solve those domestically, there are 2 pooled funds, and I promise I'm not going to steal a lot of the thunder for the next 2 presentations, but just a good graphical representation of how many states are involved in the pooled funds that are looking at BIM for bridges and BIM for infrastructure. And again, there'll be a lot more detail coming up on those, but the key is to look at how many states have now jumped on to say, okay, we're going to solve this at a national level, and Federal Highway is involved financially and with staff to help move that along as well. So this is just, again, there's a lot of stakeholder engagement. We're looking for the industry input. We're here talking at IHEEP, well, I'll say the pooled fund. I don't want to speak for the pooled fund. There's federal highway engagement. There's other federal agencies involved, national standards organizations. Again, not trying to solve this at any one specific state level. Again, there's all those people involved. And then I think I'm going to set the bar very high for data intensity on a slide and see who can top this one as we continue. So if you can read anything on this slide, congratulations, you don't need to have your eyes checked. But this is just to show the level of detail that these roadmaps are going into now, looking at, again, these discrete use cases, BIM for structures. Okay, we're building a new bridge. How would we fully integrate that as a BIM process, and all of the steps that kind of go through that. Again, I won't steal their thunder and linger on this slide too long. Now, how did we get to something as complex as that slide? Federal Highway has been involved in promoting this digital workflow for a very long time through the Everyday Counts program, all the way back to 3D engineered models. And we'll get back to why I show this slide a little bit later on, but just an idea of all of the efforts that Federal Highway has been involved in over the years to get to something where we can talk that level of complexity. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about data collection. We now have more tools than I think ever to go out and overload our servers with data. And so one of these tools is unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, drones, whatever you want to call them. We can load our servers with all the data we can handle pretty cheaply now. But what are we doing with it all? And how do we do it in a repeatable, consistent way? Just because we can go fly something, does that mean we're actually collecting usable data? So we've worked, and this again, just to give one example, in the last about 18 months or so, we had over 1,100 participants from 38 states go to workshops to get trained up on what you can use UAS for in an asset management understanding, from that framework. And those are state DOTs. So if you're thinking about, is there staff that's willing to engage in new technology? In the last 18 months, I got almost 1,200 people to sit in a room and talk drones for 2 days. So there's staff at DOTs who are willing to engage in new technology. That's kind of the main reason to show this here. And again, when you put the peer exchanges in there as well, you're pushing almost 2,000 state DOT people who have come out and shown up with this desire to learn more about the technology. Again, we don't want to miss something that's happening at the international scale, so we've gone out and looked, and we've just published this report as well. Again, we'll have the link to the full report, looking at what is happening, what's the state of practice for UAS internationally. A lot of similar things that we see for BIM. We know where we want to go. We have a good idea for what's happening here, and this is also a primer. We're going to go deep into this topic on the UAS track Wednesday morning. But we really wanted to know what was happening internationally, so we're not reinventing the wheel domestically. We don't want to spend those taxpayer funds if we don't have to. And what we found is that it really comes down to data management. I heard that from probably every one of those workshops, every one of those peer exchanges always ended with, we don't know what to do with the data. We need data management, or they still view this as a toy if we can't tie it back into some sort of engineering purpose. So this is just the UK, what they were doing is with the data density you can get from the UAS, you can cover a roadway, and then most of our engineering, or they found, about 80% of their design work is just following the standards. Take the engineering standard and apply it to your existing condition. Something that's really good for AI. So with the data density they were able to get with the UAS, they were able to do sort of automated design and create these digital models without having to spend a ton of engineering resources on it. And you'll see there's some green, yellow, red. And that means different things, with, again, the red being that the system's not confident, let your engineers spend their time there. So how do we get these smarter decisions about where we spend our engineering resources? We don't have unlimited engineering hours. So when we see a model like this, where the system's telling us in green, it is 100% confident, more or less, that the engineering standard's been applied. And in the red area, it is confident the engineering standard has not been applied. That helps you get through the engineering process a lot more quickly. And that also helps get into the asset lifecycle management, which is where we're trying to get this closing the circle on BIM, right? We can start with the digital process, collecting that data, move it through construction, and then end up in that asset management. And the more automated that system can be, and the less we are forcing our inspection staff to try to figure out how to change and identify these change conditions and update models, kind of the easier I think the adoption is going to be. And again, that's National Highways has found that, so we're looking to kind of replicate that domestically. And all of that is not being done in a silo. And again, for another thing that there will be a breakout session on this week. So if you want to know more on digital as-built, there will be that opportunity to learn more. That's currently an EDC 6 initiative. And again, looking at making sure we don't have that data loss between construction and asset management. We know we have some data loss between design and construction, so can we bridge that to carry forward the data into construction? And then now coming out of construction, can we keep that data into asset management? Again, we can get as-built, but we want to be able to rely on them and keep them long-term in a digital format. And again, why do we want to do it? Well, all the usual things. We want to try something new. And again, more information will be in great detail on how to actually make this work in the breakout sessions. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit from the technical to the how do we make this happen. And here's our sort of our bread and butter ways that we can fund state DOTs doing new things. So hopefully some of these acronyms, if not all of these acronyms, are familiar to those in this room. You've put in for a STIC grant, you've been in an EDC summit, you know what an aid demonstration project is. I have seen most of the states come through at least one of these programs. So what we're looking to do with EDC is looking at those things that are ready but not widely deployed, and it double clicked on me, but not widely deployed, and what can we do at Federal Highway to help mainstream a new technology. With the STIC program, that's in every state has one of those. Essentially, there's funding within a state the Federal Highway provides to allow a state sort of to chart their own destiny here. What are the innovations of interest to the state? You can pick what that is going to be that you're going to pursue with that funding. there's $100,000 to every state. And again, you get to kind of pick and prioritize. Now, the next slide here, this one's of interest to me. I hope it's visible. This is, looking back through the life of the STIC program, where are states choosing to spend their money? This is not federal highway telling you where you have to. This is the money you get to choose what you do with as a state. You look at e-construction and 3D modeling, by far and away, the leaders. You lump in UAS with there, and those three are the majority of what the states have spent their money on through the life of the STIC program. So again, where's the appetite? The appetite is in the innovations we've been talking about today. The staff is engaged in the innovations we've been talking about today. There's funding available within the innovations that have been talked about today. The aid demonstration program is for those bigger projects. This goes up to about $1 million. There's been 125 of those awarded so far, and $95 million through the innovation. And there will be a new notice of funding opportunities for the aid demonstration program coming soon. So again, I know there's a lot of grants coming out there, but I want to make sure that everybody's aware of all of these opportunities. So funding, hopefully in this, at least at this current time, is not the barrier that we're running up against, because there are solutions to these funding issues you may be running into. So one of the other major, this is a new grant for Advanced Digital Construction Management Systems, ADCMS. This one just was rolled out this year, and I'll start by saying what we didn't know at the time we were putting this slide deck together was how many states were going to apply, what the dollar values were going to be, and for those who are curious, which I'm sure is everybody who put in an application, right? There's 31 proposals that were submitted, totaling a little over $100 million with about $250 million in total project costs. So is there an appetite for digital processes? I would say yes. And when you look at the $100 million request from Federal Highway versus the $250 million in total project costs, that also shows you something else too. It's not just a reliance on Federal Highway to drive this. It's not just this reliance on large grants to make this happen. There is a grassroots effort. There is engagement from private sector and state DOTs to bring money to the table to make this happen, even absent ADCMS. So now that I've told everybody how many people have applied for it and how competitive this first year is going to be, for those of you who don't know, Congress created this new program in the IIJA, or bipartisan infrastructure law, whatever way you want to refer to it as, to really, again, address what we've seen is that efficiency in heavy highway construction has been flat for about 50 years. And pretty much any other sector of the economy, we've seen tremendous growth and efficiency. So how do we leverage what has been happening through the rest of the industries and bring that into construction? So we're looking at reducing our time that we're in construction, more efficiencies with our equipment, leveraging digital technology. A lot of the things that we've been talking about, this grant program couldn't have come at kind of a better time to address all the things we've been talking about today. And these, again, they're just running through the main program goals. And glad to see that safety is always there to make sure that we get that. So we're going to look for, out of that 100 million, there's 34 million available. So there's a good bit of those proposals are going to be funded, but it won't be all of them, obviously. And for the 21 eligible proposers that didn't propose anything, there's still 3 more years of ADCMS. So this will be something that will come forward for the next 3 fiscal years. We just started the fiscal year, so give us a couple months to get this one out. So it won't be happening immediately, but soon, and for the next 3 fiscal years. And we really want to leverage kind of pushing the envelope with ADCMS. We're not looking to buy software licenses. We're looking to integrate something new. Show us something new, inventive, and creative that really pushes the boundaries of what is being done today. That's what the hope is. And again, data operability is something that we saw was in a lot of those, data integration, but we also saw advances in 3D modeling and some workforce development and training. The things